Chapter 49, Divination Art. As a seer who had just stepped through the gates of mysticism, Klein did not dare to claim he knew much. However, he was certain he knew more than ordinary people. He was aware that the various kinds of divination arts could be split into 3 categories based on particular standards. And that standard was based on the source of the revelation. The first category of divination included tarot, poker, pendulums, dowsing canes, and dreams. By using the inquirer's own spirituality and its communication with the spirit world to gain a revelation, it could be interpreted for an answer. However, spirit pendulums and dowsing canes had very high requirements of one's spirituality, soul body, and astral projection. Non-beyonders were unable to obtain precise or clear revelations. Card divination provided fixed symbolism, presenting even an average person's faint revelation. Dreams were somewhere in between the other forms. The second category included spirit numerology and astromancy, as well as their derived forms. The fortune teller used either the personal details of the inquirer or changes in nature before using calculations, inference, and interpretation to answer their questions. With this method, the initiative did not lie in the inquirer, but the fortune teller. The third category used an external third party, separate from the inquirer and the fortune teller. The Ouija boards that Klein was familiar with from his previous life belonged in this category. They used rituals to ask for a direct answer from the unknown or the supernatural. Even though there was a high chance that an average person would not succeed, there were cases where they managed to communicate with malicious spirits or entities that drove them to insanity. These methods of divination usually led to tragedies. The magic mirror divination that Hannes Vincent mentioned belonged to the third category. In mysticism, mirrors were connected to the unknown and mystery, like they were the doors of the spiritual world. Thus, Klein stopped outside the meeting room, intending to learn how the famous fortune teller would explain the divination. Klein wanted to ascertain if he needed to inform the captain or not, rating him at night. Of course, there was a safe way to do the magic mirror divination. One could ask for answers from the 7 orthodox divinities. Even if it was very difficult for an ordinary person to receive any real revelations, they would not be in any danger or suffer any after effects. The magic mirror divinations that were strictly controlled by the Nighthawks and mandated punishers were those that asked evil gods or mysterious existences for help. Furthermore, the fortune teller couldn't randomly fabricate things. Some phrases or qualities had the potential to invite the attention of unknown entities. In the world where the powers of the beyonders exist, such divinations would often lead to tragedy. Klein even suspected that the original Klein, Welch, and Naya had committed such a forbidden divination by following the instructions of the Antigonus family's diary. At that moment, Hannes also explained the principle behind magic mirror divination and described the actual process. First, you choose a suitable time and date according to the divinity you believe in. You can decide this using the astromancy manual. For example, we all know that Sundays symbolize the Evernight goddess, for Sunday is the embodiment of rest. 2 to 3 in the early morning, 9 to 10 in the morning, 4 to 5 in the evening, and 11 to midnight are all related to the moon. Thus, they are controlled by the Evernight goddess. Thus, fortune tellers that pray to the Evernight goddess can use magic mirror divination during these times on a Sunday. Quite a good foundation. Klein nodded slightly while using the half-closed door to the meeting room to conceal himself. It had to be said that with the 7 major churches keeping each other in check, some mysticism knowledge had indeed leaked. For example, many of the meanings behind the symbolism could be found in the astromancy manual. However, without the potions or beyonder powers, ordinary people were unable to obtain the desired effects. Second, we must scrutinize the mirror carefully. It must be a mirror coated with silver. You place the mirror at the position representing the moon. Hannes demonstrated with the prop in his hand. No, what he needs now is spirit dowsing. First, choose a position and recite the phrase. This place is suitable for magic mirror divination 7 times in your head. Then see which direction the pendulum turns. Clockwise for true, counterclockwise for false. Of course, if you are asking for answers from a malicious supernatural entity, the position would not matter. Rather, it would depend on whether the entity is interested in answering your questions. Klein silently corrected him. At this point, He felt like a teacher listening in on a lesson. Hannas Vincent could not hear Klein's mental musings as he described the preparations in detail in a normal tone. When the members finished taking notes, he continued explaining. After showering, confirm that you have drawn all your curtains and lock your doors. After that, light up a candle and place it in front of the mirror before sincerely praying to the divinity you believe in. Try to keep your questions simple, as there's no need for fanciful embellishment. After praying 7 times, pick up your mirror and gently toss it on the ground. Make sure to be gentle. Remember the way it shatters, as that is a revelation from the gods. I will tell you the main symbolisms in a second. Phew, this is orthodox magic mirror divination. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he walked into the meeting room and sat back down in his previous seat. He finished the rest of his Southville coffee in one gulp. So-called orthodox divination meant that it was possible to obtain revelations, but it was impossible to truly interpret it. And for beyonders who reached this step, they could look straight into the mirror to obtain clear information if they received a response. As there were many potential symbolisms after the shattering, Hannas taught for a long while. He was not done even when Edward Steve returned to the room after finishing his fortune-telling. Klein did not ask what Edward did for his fortune-telling or what method did he use, since it was an unspoken rule among fortune-tellers. While acting as a seer, he naturally had to abide by it strictly unless the other party mentioned it. I discovered that many a time, our interpretation is too vague, as though it's meeting different requests, allowing different people to find a description of themselves from the interpretation. Edward drank a mouthful of side black tea and said with a soft sigh, "For example, those that encounter adversities and calamities will eventually see the light of hope. Heh, but no one knows when the light of hope will come. For example, a journey might not be very smooth sailing, but you will definitely arrive alive. The dead will not retort me." As he did not listen from the beginning, he ignored Hannes's magic mirror divination class. Survival bias, added Klein with a smile. Survival bias generally meant that a lot of statistics would only include those who were alive and lucky. The data would ignore the dead. Therefore, the results would be clearly biased. Right? Emperor Roselle was really a philosopher, marveled Edward. Speechless, Klein raised his empty cup and pretended to take a sip. The members were fully immersed in the study of horoscopes and magic mirror divination the entire afternoon. Occasionally, they would also discuss with Klein and Edward, and when that happened, Klein would try his best to meet his duty as an informal member of the Nighthawks. He would try hard to steer the topic away from anything related to beyonders or dangerous ideas. However, he failed at the thing he wanted to do the most. A few inquirers came, but none of them picked him to do their fortune-telling. Perhaps I have to be more proactive in entertaining them. Should I use a few phrases like, "You are plagued with bad luck," "You have been unlucky recently," or "Nothing you do will happen smoothly"? No, that's nothing like a seer. With this in mind, Klein could not help but shake his head in self-deprecation. He picked up his cane, stood up, and left after bidding everyone farewell. At 5:30, Edward Steve put on his coat and was prepared to walk out the divination club when he suddenly saw a familiar figure. "Good afternoon, Glassy. Long time no see," he greeted with a smile. He saw his friend with similar interests as him wear his usual format suit with a black bow tie. In front of his chest hung a monocle. Immediately following that, he noticed that his friend did not look well. Even his soft blonde hair looked dry. "Good afternoon, Edward." Cough. Glassy, with his hat in hand, suddenly used his fist to cover his mouth as he coughed a few times. Edward asked out of concern, "You seem to be ill?" "A very serious illness. It even turned into pneumonia. If it wasn't for my wife, who met an impressive apothecary and gave me a magical medicine, you would have probably had to visit me at the cemetery." Glassy's tone was filled with a lingering fear and joy. "Lord, I can't believe it. You were so healthy previously. Look at you. You look so frail now. I remember when I did divination on you. There were no signs that indicated that you would get a serious illness." Edward waved his cane and said with an astonished sigh, "My own divination had the same result as yours. Perhaps we are not qualified fortune-tellers." Besides, Glassy suddenly recalled the happenings on Monday as his expression turned abnormally serious. At that moment, the beautiful lady, Angelica, came over and bowed with a pleasant smile. After exchanging greetings, she first showed concern for Glassy's health and provided some suggestions. Then, she mentioned in passing, Mr. Glassy, Mr. Moretti, who requested your divination services previously, has joined our club as well. The one who got me to tell his fortune? Glassy's eyes lit up immediately. Lord, where is he? He just left. Angelica and Edward were unable to comprehend Glassy's abnormal reaction. Glassy took 2 steps in agitation and said, the next time he comes, please ask him when he will come if I'm not around. Glassy, what happened? Did that Mr. Klein Moretti do something to you? Asked Edward in puzzlement. Glassy raised his arm and stared straight into Edward's and Angelica's probing gazes. He said in excitement, he's a very, very, very magical. He lowered his arm and said after using very thrice, Doctor. Chapter 50. Old Neil's Method of Repayment. 7:30 in the evening, around the Moretti family's dining table. Klein, why do you need to be at work so early as a consultant? Would emergency matters at the security company be more dangerous? Benson forked a potato from a dish of potato-stewed beef as he raised the matter in concern. Klein carefully spat out the bones from a pan-fried fish and gave his prepared answer. A batch of historical documents needed immediate shipping to Backlund. I had to be present to handle the handover and make sure there was nothing missing. As you can guess, the bunch of fist-swinging bastards don't know any FASAC. Upon hearing his answer, Benson, who had finished chewing his food, could not help but sigh. Knowledge is truly important. Making use of this opportunity, Klein took out the remaining £5 note and handed it to Benson. This is my additional payment I received today. It's time you get some decent clothes too. £5. Benson and Melissa said in unison. Benson took the note and looked at it repeatedly. He said in both shock and doubt, this security company sure is generous. His weekly salary was £1.10 solely, which meant £6 exactly every 4 weeks. He only earned £1 additional from this additional payment. And with that salary, he had managed to support his siblings, giving them a decent place to stay and allowing them to eat meat 2 to 3 times a week. Every year, they could get a few new clothes. Are you doubting me? Klein deliberately returned with a question. Benson chuckled. I doubt you have the ability nor the guts to rob a bank. You aren't someone who can lie. Melissa answered seriously after lowering her fork and knife. I am now someone used to lying. Klein immediately felt a little ashamed. Although it was a result of the circumstances of his reality, his sister's belief in him left him melancholic. It was relatively urgent and important today. I also played a crucial role, which is the reason for the £5, Klein explained. In a way, what he said was the truth. As for the £5 that he would be reimbursed with, the one he would use to join the divination club, he planned on concealing it. Firstly, if he brought £5 home again, he would truly scare his siblings, making them suspect he was doing something illegal. Secondly, he had to save to buy additional materials to practice being a seer and to grasp more mysticism knowledge. Benson bit off a mouthful of wheat bread in satisfaction and thought for more than 10 seconds. The work I'm at doesn't need any decent clothes. Well, to be precise, the clothes at home are sufficient. Without waiting for Klein to persuade him, he suggested, with this additional income, we would truly have savings. I plan on buying a few books on accountancy and studying. Klein, Melissa, I do not wish that my weekly salary remained below £2 in 5 years. As you know, my boss and manager have shit for brains. Their mouths stink the moment they open them. Excellent idea, agreed Klein. He also took the opportunity to steer the conversation. Why don't you read some of the grammar books in my room? To be truly dignified and to earn a handsome pay, that's something rather critical. Perhaps, in the times to come, the civil servant examinations will appear in Lone Kingdom. Preparing ahead of time would give him the advantage. Benson's eyes lit up when he heard that. I've indeed forgotten about that. Here, let's toast to a beautiful future. He did not drink rye beer. Instead, he poured clear oyster soup into 3 cups and clinked his cup with his siblings. After drinking the clear soup, he looked at his sister who was wrestling with the pan-fried fish. He chuckled and said, aside from Benson's books, I think Melissa needs a new dress too. Melissa looked up and shook her head incessantly. No, I think it's best to save it up. Klein finished the sentence for her. Yeah. Melissa nodded in agreement. In fact, if you do not seek the best fabrics and the newest designs, it would not be too expensive. We can save up the remaining money, said Klein in a manner which did not allow for disagreement. Benson added, Melissa, are you planning on wearing the old dress again to Selena's 16th birthday bash? Selena Wood was Melissa's classmate and good friend. She came from quite a good family background. Her elder brother was a practicing solicitor, and her father was a senior employee of Backlund Bank's Tingen branch. However, the so-called bash was only a dinner invitation to friends where they chatted and played cards. All right. Melissa lowered her head and mumbled a response. Then, she ruthlessly forked a piece of stewed beef. After a short silence, she suddenly recalled something and looked up abruptly. Mrs. Shout from next door got her maidservant to send a calling card over. She wishes to make a formal visit on Sunday, at 4 in the afternoon tomorrow. She wants to get to know her new neighbors. Mrs. Shout. Klein looked at his siblings, confounded. Benson rapped the side of the table with his fingers and appeared to be thinking. Mrs. Shout from 4 Daffodil Street? I met her husband before. He's a senior solicitor. Senior solicitor? Perhaps he knows Selena's brother, said Melissa with some hints of delight. We are at 2 Daffodil Street. Klein nodded slightly. It's imperative we get to know our neighbors, but as you know, I still have to be at the company on Sunday. I only have time off on Monday. Please pass my apologies to Mrs. Shout. With that said, he suddenly recalled the neighbors of his former life when he was young, as well as the neighbors in the apartment from Iron Cross Street. He was amused as he sighed lightly. To have formal visits. Shouldn't neighbors get to know each other through natural interaction? Ha. Klein, that's because you aren't aware. You have read a lot of newspapers recently, but you have not broached the magazines catered towards families and middle-aged women. They placed families with an annual income of £100 to £1,000 as middle class. They promoted it as the framework of the entire kingdom and praised how the middle class doesn't have the arrogance of the aristocrats and the wealthy, nor are they as crass as the low-income brackets. Benson lightly and happily explained. These magazines impart many simplified ceremonies which the aristocrats practice in their interactions. As such, it becomes a target of the middle class. Thus, this results in the differences between intimate calls, semi-formal calls, and formal calls. As he spoke, he shook his head and chuckled. Typically, gentlemen, madams, and ladies who view themselves in this class will be very particular about details. They will visit their neighbors and friends from 2 to 6 in the afternoon. It's known as a morning call. Morning call. Klein and Melissa asked in surprise. Why was a visit from 2 to 6 in the afternoon a morning call? Benson put down his fork and knife, threw his hands up, and smiled. I do not know why either. All I did was read the magazines my female colleague brought. Yeah, perhaps it's because they wear their morning gowns to make the call. Morning gowns were a form of formal attire worn during mass or gatherings. Later, it was considered as formal attire for the day, different from the formal attire for evening functions. All right, remember to buy some good coffee powder and tea leaves in the afternoon. Buy some muffins and lemon egg tarts from Mrs. Smyron. We must not ill-treat our neighbors. Klein chuckled as he dipped his remaining bread into the meat sauces, grabbed some potato, and put it into his mouth. The next morning was a Sunday morning. Klein finished the last mouthful of inferior tea, put down the newspapers, and wore his half-top hat. Picking up his silver, inlaid black cane, he sauntered out the door and took a public carriage to Zutland Street. He greeted Roseanne, who was planning to sleep in the break room after finishing her night duty, after which he went all the way down to the basement. After turning a corner, he met a Nighthawk member, Sleepless Royale Radine. She looked like a cold lady. Her brows were long and slender, sitting atop large eyes. Her hair was a silky smooth black. Good morning, Madame Radine, Klein greeted with a smile. Royale used her deep blue eyes to glance at him and nodded indiscernibly in return. The two quickly passed by each other when Royale stopped and said with her eyes trained forward, "Ritualistic magic is a very dangerous thing." Oh, Klein was taken aback. By the time he turned around, all he saw was her departing back. Thank you. He frowned and shouted at Royale Ridine's back. After taking a left band, he quickly met old Neil inside the armory, as well as Brett, who should not have been there. Let's go to my place. I've already received the corresponding materials. Brett has agreed to watch the armory for me, said old Neil with a chuckle. Klein was immediately surprised. We aren't doing it here. Old Neil held a silver chest and tooted. There's no space here to practice ritualistic magic. Klein did not ask further. He followed Old Neil up to the streets and took a public carriage to the North Borough's suburbs. Old Neil's place was a bungalow. The garden in front of it was filled with roses, gold mint, and other materials. The moment he entered, there was a carpeted foyer. There were 2 high-back chairs and an umbrella rack. Through the foyer was an expansive living room. The walls were plastered with light-colored wallpaper. The floors were a dark brown color. In the middle of the room was a tiny carpet with floral imprints, and placed above it was a heavy round table. Surrounding the table were comfortable long benches, single cedars, and a piano. My deceased wife loved music. Old Neil pointed at the piano and mentioned in passing, "The sofa and coffee table are in the bedrooms. Let's do the ritualistic magic in the living room." "All right," Klein replied cautiously. After Old Neil put down the silver chest, he laughed and said, "Let me demonstrate to you ritualistic magic. Make sure to observe and remember the ritual." As he spoke, he took out a fake goatskin parchment from the chest. It was specially made, and it had strange pictures drawn on it with black ink that exuded a serene fragrance. Klein kept watching and finally discovered that Old Neil was seemingly, likely, possibly drawing an IOU. When Old Neil filled in the corresponding field with the number 30 and the corresponding pound symbol, Klein could not help but ask out of puzzlement and confusion, "Mr. Neil, what kind of ritualistic magic are you doing?" Old Neil coughed and answered very seriously, "I'll be using magic to settle that debt of 30 pounds today." "You can do that?" Klein's eyes widened as his mouth gaped. Chapter 51. The Grounded Ritualistic Magic. Using magic to settle an IOU? Is he trying to curse his debtor to death or create counterfeit notes? I might not have a solution to the problem, but I can finish you instead? All sorts of thoughts appeared in Klein's mind as he looked at Old Neil oddly. He seriously considered the possibility of calling the cops. No, of informing the Nighthawks. Old Neil shot a glance at him and said peeved, "I can see ignorance, foolishness, and the weak and shameless disbelief in your eyes. Didn't Dunn tell you the maxim of the mystery priors? Do as you wish, but do no harm." Although this maxim originated from the secret and evil Moses Ascetic Order organization, Beyonders who choose the path of Moses' ascetic order have proven that it's right through their own experiences. As long as one strictly abides to it and shows the needed fear and reverence, the risk of losing control will be minimized. The contrary has similarly been established. Your suspicion towards me is an insult to mystery priors. Sorry. Klein did not hesitate to apologize. He had indeed forgotten that Dunn Smith had once mentioned the maxim. Old Neil was not truly angry. In a blink of an eye, he chuckled. A pity. Very few Beyonders choose to be seers. There is no corresponding maxim to help you. But I have Emperor Rosel's diaries. Yes, strictly abiding to the maxim has a hint of acting. Klein suddenly came to this thought as he nodded as if in deep thought. Old Neil did not continue. He removed the vases and other items from the round table and placed them in a corner. Immediately following that, he took out both a crimson red and black candle from the silver chest. He explained, if ordinary people attempt ritualistic magic, they have to follow the results from astromancy or read corresponding manuals. They have to choose suitable dates and times. For example, the day representing the goddess, the period when she rules over the moon. But for us Beyonders, especially Beyonders good in this domain, there's no need for that. Our acute spiritual perception and potent astral projections are key. Of course, if you are not confident about the ritualistic magic you are attempting, it's best to choose a suitable date and time. It can increase the probability of success. All right, this is based on a premise. Remember carefully to abide strictly by the rules. Old Neil placed 2 candles and turned to the side and looked at Klein, saying very solemnly, low-sequence Beyonders are not strong enough. Almost all the ritualistic magic they can perform are the seeking of external powers and help. Therefore, you can only consider orthodox divinities like the goddess or the Lord of Storms. Absolutely, absolutely do not attempt to communicate with the unknown or unpredictable existences. Even if people believe in them or the promises recorded are filled with enticements. Believe me, don't take any chances. As long as you attempt once, you will go down a slippery slope into the abyss with no return. Any work or resistance will only slow it down with no way to change the trajectory. I'll remember, Klein said in a deep voice. However, he felt a little afraid. My luck enhancement ritual has apparently sought power from an unknown and unpredictable existence. Furthermore, I have gained powers capable of pulling people into the fog that even a senior beyonder like the Hanged Man finds unbelievable. Well, at least I think he is a senior beyonder. Thankfully, I haven't gone mad or have any signs of losing control. While worrying over this, he proactively changed the subject. So, Nighthawk should seek the help of the goddess? No one will stop you if you pray to the Lord of Storms. However, we are unable to tell from our ritualistic magic whether he replies with malicious intent or not. The outcome will be distorted in unpredictable ways. Old Neil successfully made Klein give up the idea in a joking manner. There was no so-called best, only necessary. After his exhortations, Old Neil picked up a crimson-red candle and said, "By using candles made of moon flowers and dark red sandalwood, it will represent the goddess's identity as Lady of Crimson in the ritualistic magic." He pointed to the black candles and said, "Candles made of night vanilla and slumber flowers represent the night." As he spoke, he placed the black candle on the top left end of the round table, while the red candle was placed on the top right end. Why do we symbolize the goddess with only 2 candles? She is also the mother of concealment, empress of misfortune and horror, and mistress of repose and silence. Old Neil chuckled. That's right. This is something I wished you asked. Before their fall, the Moses ascetic order had a very good relationship with the church. Their beliefs and results on ritualistic magic have heavily influenced us. They believe that all objects are numeric. Every number has a spirituality, and in ritualistic magic, 0 represents the unknown or chaos. It symbolizes the state of the universe before it was born. 1 represents a beginning, the first creator. 2 represents the world and various divinities that were produced from his body. 3 represents contact between divinities and material objects to create all things. Here, using 2 candles represents the goddess while the 3rd candle is for you. Which 2 candles and which 2 symbols to have depend on the intended effects of the ritualistic magic. 3 begets all things, 1. All things stem from 3. Klein could not help but recall certain things from his previous life. Seeing Klein listen attentively, Old Neil took a 3rd candle and said, "This is the candle representing me. It's a very ordinary candle which only has a little bit of mint added. Take note that plants like roses, lemons, mint, moonflower, night vanilla, and slumber flower are beloved and cherished by the goddess." Viewing it from another angle, the 3 candles represent the bodies, spiritualities, and godhood of every person. After finishing the description, Old Neil placed the 3rd candle in the middle of the round table. He then took out a bottle of concocted full moon essence oil, a huge cauldron engraved with the dark sacred emblem, a silver knife with gorgeous patterns, a cup of water, and a saucer of coarse salt. To beyonders who are not good at ritualistic magic, there is a need for bells, crystal balls, silver cups, incense, or other supplementary items. However, mystery priors and seers have no need for that. These artifacts are already sufficient. Old Neil placed the fake goatskin parchment with the IOU just below the cauldron and used a special quill to hold down one corner. He turned to Klein and said, "Ritualistic magic needs a clean spiritual environment where you will not be disturbed. And that requires us to create it. The steps are to first enter cogitation. Focus your mind, and with the supplementary items, draw out our strength and construct it around us." For example, Ray Bieber's house had used holy night powder while I'll be using a ritual silver dagger. Throughout the entire process, we have to go according to the outcome we desire to confirm the symbolism and corresponding incantation. Incantations are best done in Hermes because ancient Hermes stemmed from nature. It's akin to ancient Dragonese and ancient Elvish. The effects are very direct, lacking the necessary concealment and protection. It easily causes the caster to fall into danger. This is also why it has been modified. However, it's more effective. All right, I have to focus on the ritualistic magic. I won't explain things to you any further. Pay attention by watching and listening. Remember any problems and ask me when everything is done. All right. Klein took 2 steps back and trained his eyes on Old Neil. Old Neil's eyes rapidly darkened as invisible wind around him spun. He was silent for a moment, going from left to right, then up to down, using his psyche to cause friction and consecutively light up the 3 candles. Following that, he picked up the silver knife and stabbed it into the coarse salt. Then, he chanted in Hermes, I sanctify you, blade of pure silver. I cleanse and purify you, allowing you to serve me in this ritual. In the name of the Evernight Goddess, the Lady of Crimson, you have been sanctified. After a short but powerful syllable, Old Neil drew a silver knife and inserted it into a cup of clear water. Then, he raised it and pointed to the space beyond the round table. He aimed the blade tip in the periphery and took a step forward, circling the round table. Every step he took made Klein feel an invisible energy spew out of the silver knife. It was filled with spirituality as it connected with the air, forming a completely sealed wall. After walking one round, the altar was completely isolated from its surroundings. Old Neil stood in front of the round table and put the silver knife down. He picked up the bottle of full moon essence oil and dripped 3 drops on the black, dark red, and ordinary candles. Sizzle. A thin mist emanated as everything seemed to become veiled in mystery. Old Neil put down the glass bottle and looked at the fake goatskin parchment silently for 2 minutes. Then, he picked up the quill and drew a mark he controlled, a square that framed all the content, indicating that he was in control of the debt. Following that, he drew another cross, indicating that it was canceled. Upon reaching this step, he picked up the parchment with one hand and tapped his glabella with the other to activate his spirit vision. Another invisible and exuberant energy bloomed as Old Neil whispered a chant. I pray for the power of the dark night. I pray for the power of the crimson. I pray for the goddess's loving grace. Please provide me with the funds to pay this IOU. Night vanilla, an herb that belongs to the red moon. Please bestow your powers to my incantation. Moonflower, an herb that belongs to the red moon. Please bestow your powers to my incantation. Klein was completely flabbergasted listening from the side. All sorts of thoughts arose in him. Such an incantation can work? Although it was recited from written Hermes. Isn't this way too simple and down to earth? Wouldn't the goddess be angry and multiply the debt several-fold? At that moment, the candlelight lit up suddenly. After Old Neil finished his incantation, he closed his eyes for 2 minutes. He picked up the full moon essence oil and dripped 1 drop onto each of the 3 candles. Immediately following that, he grabbed the parchment and pulled it close to the candle representing me. When it ignited, he immediately threw it into the cauldron. Old Neil closed his eyes again as he seemed to sense the burning of the IOU. He opened his eyes after a moment and looked toward the black sacred emblem on the cauldron. The parchment was already completely incinerated. Praise the lady. Old Neil tapped his chest in 4 spots, forming the shape of the crimson moon. Then, he extinguished the candles in the opposite order as he lit them. After finishing everything, he used the silver knife to rip apart the invisible wall around him. A huge wind stirred immediately as Old Neil heaved a sigh of relief. It's done. That's it. Klein asked in a daze. Has the IOU been settled? How? I don't know either. Anyways, it will be settled in a reasonable manner, said Old Neil with a smile as he threw up his hands. Klein was unsure what expression or words to use as a response. Isn't this a little unreliable?